Everyone. I'm Burak from Disqus, as they announced me. So I'm going to talk about continuous translation. What that means for me is we do multiple deploys a day usually at Disqus, and we support more than 28 languages. And that takes some effort usually, but for our case, it's just kind of low. And I wanted to share the story behind that so that other people can actually keep translating the projects and keep the translations up to date. Why I care about translations is because I think it matters. It matters because I don't know how many of you speak Arabic, but I don't. And when I look at this, it just intimidates me. If I see a product like that, I just avoid using it. Or like this, like Chinese, right? I don't speak Chinese. I don't write Chinese. And when I see something like that, that terrifies me. And that's actually the case when you create an English application and then try to serve it to Europe, for instance. If they don't speak English, they get intimidated. Or maybe make it German, and some English-speaking person comes into your site and sees something like this. So this looks better, right? So serving the native language to that user is actually shows you care about that user. So that's why we try to strive at Disqus to provide as many languages as we can without any limits on that. I started with the project a small nimble goal as a Turkish speaking person. When I joined Disqus, I'm like, hey, we gotta have this in Turkish. And they said, okay, try it, but we don't think it's gonna be easy because you don't have to slow us down with translations. We are focused on the US market right now, and they're we don't really care about that much. So you cannot slow us down with your translation stuff. If you can manage that, okay, I'm challenge accepted. So why this is important is velocity matters. I just type this git command and 27,000 insertions in 2 months. It's quite a lot. It's a really changing code base, and this happens with 8 front-end engineers. 3 mini projects per month. Those mini projects can be rich media, highlighted comments and that stuff. Some things we cannot announce right now. Those kind of things. So it's changed rapidly, and we do almost daily deploys, actually more than daily deploys, usually 7 deploys per week. We have 5 working days, if you good number. And the funny thing is, we have actually 4,000 words changing per week. It's actually higher than this number. That is the translations though, not the source strings. So we have quite a change here. And the time we spend on translations, any guesses? Anyone want to guess? It's a per week, or you can say per day. Well, we have 8 front-end engineers. I cannot slow anyone down, and we don't want to put throw shit to our support people. So, we can say 2%. So it's actually 1 hour per week. About it's usually lower than that, but sometimes it goes high. So the average is about 1 hour per week, and that's with 28 languages and counting. So we don't have any restrictions on the number of languages. Actually, there are 96 languages available in Transifex, I guess. I'm gonna come to that point later. So how is this possible? What makes this possible is one of the major things we use is community translation. So we actually don't have a team that translates everything. We actually rely on the community. If you speak German or if you speak French, we expect you to, hey, I want this thing in my language. Okay, go ahead, go to the service we provide, or actually the service we buy or use, and just translate things. We have more than 1,400 translators, and the number's just increasing all the time. And the other thing, that's what I'm going to focus on, is automating all the things. That's how this is made possible. So the combined solution for this is actually software as a service for translations, which we use. And the chef's recommendation is Transifex. You really should check it out, because I'm going to assume you kind of use Transifex throughout the talk. There's some other services competing with them. They're not free, but you can use them for free for open source projects, I guess. But the thing is, they abstract things out and makes things really easy for you, that you can keep your velocity when developing. And the advantages you get is this storage problem for translations, where and how. So storing translations in your source code is not a really good idea, especially the source strings, because they can be extracted from the source code itself. So you're actually storing some sort of binaries in your code, which is not good. A service is like software as a service thing gives you like, hey, I'm the storage, I'm the database, whatever. You just like take them from me and put them into my data store. It also solves the UI problem. I don't know like if you've seen translation UIs, but they usually suck. And we had one that sucked too, really bad. And like if you buy a service or like use this service or something like this, it gives you a really nice UI. Focus on that because that's all what they do, right? They focus on translating stuff. So they give you an awesome thing. They give you glossaries, suggestions, whatever, those kind of things. And this also makes automation a requirement because now you're relying on a third-party service, right? So you have to automate things because you cannot go to like tap on the shoulder of your friend and say, hey, like, can you help me with that? No, that won't happen. And one more thing is like, since they really focus on languages and translations, they abstract language-specific issues. For instance, I learned that Arabic has 6 different pluralizations. Like, I don't want to manage that or like know that, or like some interesting Unicode issues and stuff, or like how the language is pronounced in its own language. You just don't care about those. It's just, you don't know anything about that. To make this happen, we needed a revision pipeline. I call this a revision pipeline because this is run with every revision or pull request or whatever you use, like diffs, patches, whatever, that you submit to the system, which we can summarize as with this like small pipeline graph, like mark, extract, and outsource. I'm gonna walk through each item. So marking translatables in source files is the essence of making this work. You can use get text. I'm gonna delve into that for JavaScript or C or whatever those kind of languages, even with Python, Django, whatever you use. You can mark them in your templates. Handlebars has stuff for this. Jinja probably has that, and like, or even you can use like pure HTML and somehow mark them, and like for others to extract. Like the second most important thing about this step is them to be able, like your program to be able to extract those strings efficiently and without any human interaction. Like you just run a command and it extracts all the strings in your application. And then you just outsource these strings and like send them to your services, software as a service provider, and like forget about them. So marking translatables is like usually done with getText function, which is kind of defined as like this. You give that a string, and it looks up in a dictionary. If it has a translation like a value, it returns that value. If not, it just falls back to the key itself. So the key is a translatable string. And if it cannot find a translation, it just shows the original one. So if you don't have a translatable, like if you have a string not translated yet, at least people see the English version or like whatever your source language is. It is used like this. You pass a string, and if you create the assignment, then it just returns a translated one. If you have variables, okay, take your picture. If you have variables, you have this person, parentheses, variable name, S syntax. This is a legacy from C, but that is the most common and like widely used format. The thing I do that would replace it, just don't do that. I just did it quickly for slides. You should use a proper interpolator, just like printf or your invention, doesn't matter. It just needs to handle this syntax, like person, variable name, in parentheses, and S. And extracting translatables is done usually like a tool. My recommendation is to use JS getText for JavaScript projects, which is developed by Mozilla. I'm one of the current maintainers of it. It uses, it actually parses your source code, not uses regexes or something. It actually creates a parse tree and stuff, and does some really cool stuff. And it also supports some widely used template languages like Handlebars, Jinja, Jade, whatever. And what you do is like you run this command and it generates you a file which is kind of in this format. Like you have this message ID and then the translation is empty right now. Then you're gonna upload this file or outsource it using Transifex's client called TX. It's kind of Git-like. You just say TX push to send them. You name your resource. I said Disqus.js. You can say my app, whatever. And -- source means I'm uploading the source file, not the translations. And skip means like skip anything else in the middle. You can get more information about that, but it's kind of simple as that. Nothing more. So there are some things to be careful about this because I mentioned like with each revision you do this, right? You introduce a new string with a revision, and then this thing runs and sends that string to Transifex to get translated. The thing is, if you have two diffs, two different revisions that introduce two different strings, they will override each other if you do the thing I just showed. So you actually need to merge what is available in the service. This is a really good thing about those services too. You can actually download what is there, just like SVN. Anyone who used SVN in the past, you actually need to like download all the changes before from the server and then add your changes on top of it, which you can do with these two commands. Like, don't worry about the -L0, whatever, those kind of things. It's just simple. Like, you just pull the source and pass a parameter saying join existing, which means like don't create something from scratch, but just use these. One little downside of this is unused translations pile up, but this is fixable. What I mean is sometimes you remove strings from your application, but if you keep downloading the existing ones and building on top of them, unused ones never get actually erased from your source translation source files. But it's not a big deal. If you don't use it, it just kind of increases the size, but you can always do like a scratch, like build them from the scratch command, and then it just cleans it up. And more important thing is, with each revision, you upload all the new strings introduced by that revision to a public place, to your community of translators, right? And they see some features, or at least translations for features before they get available to them. So if you're really frantic about like hiding things from end users before they get really ready, this might be a deal breaker for you, and something to keep in mind. So after handling revisions, you actually need a build pipeline too. Right? Everything you deploy, before you deploy, you actually need to build your application, and that now it should include translations. That is actually quite simple. You have this fetch step and the build step. Fetch step is like fetching translations from the service, and build step is just like converting that PO or POT file, which is in a different format, into your application's language. For instance, Django or Python applications usually use MO files, which are the compiled versions of them. In JavaScript, you can use JSON or pure JS files that make some assignments. It's up to you, really. So fetching translations is done with this command, but before that, to make everything dynamic enough, like to not bound the languages you support, your service actually should provide you a list of languages they support, they make available, and the info with them. And you should first download that, or you store it in your code base, but every time you do a build, you should actually update this file, which is not a really large file, by the way. And then you download the actual translations, and then you go to the build step, which is quite easy if you use Grunt or something like that. You can even like write a make script or something, just your preference, which is just, again, converting those PO files into something usable by your program, in this case, JavaScript. There's some like things to be careful about this step, because like the biggest thing we worry about is even if it never went down, what if Transifex goes down and I want to build at that time? Like maybe I'm releasing a quick fix and I want to build that, right? And Transifex is not available, or my network to that portion is down. Should I cancel the build? No. The easy solution is, don't get scared with the code. It's actually a summary of what we do. We actually package the last used translations in a tarball, store it in a server of ours, and then first place it in place and then update the translations, which means even if I cannot contact Transifex, I can at least use the last known translations. It may not be up to date, but at least you're not failing. You actually provide something to the people. And the one good thing you get from this is Transifex's client is smart enough to not fetch stale translations. So between two builds, if, for instance, Turkish language did not change, it doesn't download that if you place the old file there. It just checks it and, hey, this is not updated. I'm not going to re-download it. Some additional considerations when having rapid translations is the RTL support. How many of you are familiar with RTL languages, or like at least know about what RTL is? Okay, not many hands, but not too less too. RTL is, there are some languages just like Arabic or Persian that are written from right to left instead of our languages like left to right. And that needs some special treatment, not really a big deal, but you have to take it into account. And the second thing is translating dates and times, which you should not do yourself, seriously. There are tons of libraries for that. Don't reinvent the wheel. It's really hard stuff, and people are actually taking care of that. It's not changing. Like, you don't when they wake up and say, hey, I'm not going to call it January, I'm going to say Janny for this month. You don't do that. So just stick with the libraries. I'm going to come back to that. So RTL support. The first step is detecting if the language is RTL, which is conveniently provided by your software as a service thing. There's like an, what was that thing? Like, is RTL or like RTL true or false, like a Boolean flag. And then you need to set your dir attribute in your HTML file, assuming you're doing this for HTML or based applications. You set the RTL direction thing. I'm going to dive into that more. And then you create the CSS for RTL, because browsers are stupid. Even if you set direction RTL, it doesn't actually flip your layout to accommodate that. So you actually need to flip your CSS, like float left becomes float right, and those kind of things. Don't get scared. There's an automated solution for that too. So again, detecting, I already mentioned Transifex RTL true, or you can maintain your own list like Arabic, Persian. There are like 6 languages I know. Setting the direction attribute is kind of more tricky, but not really. So you first of all, you set direction RTL on your HTML, like the top level element, but you set direction auto on all user content, because even if the page is in like Arabic, for instance, people actually can have like English nicknames or like English site names, English comments even, and then you don't want them to be like showing in reverse direction. So you use direction auto and let the browser decide on the direction of that. So creating CSS for RTL is the most tricky thing, we thought, but it actually was quite easy. There's a tool for that. Chef's recommendation is R2. There's also one more thing, CSS Janus, I guess. R2 works on Node.js. I'm also one of the maintainers. I like it a lot. It again parses your CSS, finds float rights, and converts them to float lefts or vice versa, and handles lots of things. And it's open source, so you can extend it if it doesn't do anything, something you want. So translating dates and times. I already mentioned that you should use libraries, and my solution or my suggestion is to use Moment.js, which is an awesome library. It has lots of translations built in. It has relative timestamps like 2 days ago in all languages, also has all the formats and stuff, so you just don't worry about that. Just bundle those and you're done. That also, pro tip, use Unix timestamps whenever possible, because they're time zone agnostic, you don't have any issues, and it's just a number, so you just pass the number, let the browser do its magic, or your server. Now, that brings me to the kind of finishing parts of my automation stuff, which is covering it all up. You really need a build automation system, right? You need a Travis CI kind of thing, maybe Jenkins, or maybe Git hooks, or like your own thing. But for this system to work, you already need a working automation system in place for your builds or patches and all kind of things you use. And again, one of the crucial things is using a software as a service for translations. You can use Transifex. There are some alternatives. Again, I don't really know anything more off the top of my head, but Transifex really was the key for us to go to success. And obviously, you need a task runner. Like for Python, you can use Paver. If you're using C, or like you just want to stick to the old path, you can use Make. If you're hipster, you can use Gulp. Or if you're like more traditional JavaScript person like me, you can use Grunt. I've actually extracted out some simple things, simple tasks that I defined in our Grunt file. I'll provide the link for my slides, and then you can click on that link and see whatever you want. It's not much, but it gives you things. So the thing is, mission accomplished. Like I finally, after a year's work or something, I have managed to get Disqus in Turkish, and I can show my mom this thing. Like, hey, mom, this is the thing I work, and you can actually understand what it says. And I'm wrapping up. Actually, I want to continue the last 5 minutes with questions and answers. But before that, if this talk was interesting or all this stuff, we're hiring. Just visit our jobs page or drop me a line. I'm Matt BYK on Twitter. And that wraps up everything. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. And these are the links this is the link for the slides.
So question?